Don't make the same mistakes we did. Learn about our single most recurrent HR problem in this episode of Down Payment.
Welcome to Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers. Prepare to learn something new about the industry that keeps us moving.
Check out all our podcast content on our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X. Welcome back, and in this episode, we're talking HR, every dealer's favorite topic. For whatever reason, HR is tough in the automotive industry. For whatever reason, there is often a lot of human resources related drama going on in most dealerships, and it's holding dealerships back from their full potential. It becomes a competitive disadvantage that can really do a lot of damage to your dealership's performance. Success for dealers is often getting past these HR issues and building some consistency into their operations. Now, every dealership is different, but for our dealership, there was one totally avoidable problem that we kept facing. It was our managers taking ambiguous HR actions. What does that mean? Well, it could take several forms, but was often along the lines of this. Manager gets into a dispute with employee, and they tell the employee something along the lines of, quote, "I don't like your attitude, get out of here," end quote. And the employee would pack up and go home. Was this employee fired? Were they suspended? Were they just supposed to go back to their desk and instead they left the lot and abandoned their job? All a question. And what's worse is there were often multiple managers present or involved in the situation, and they each came away with a different interpretation. You would have one manager that was said, "Oh, they were definitely fired." Another manager said, "Oh, they were just told to go home for the day." And another manager that said they were just kicked out of the office. They weren't supposed to go anywhere. This type of ambiguity presents the worst possible set of facts to then go back and try to defend the company against some sort of HR complaint, unemployment, something similar. I would try to do my best with those situations. I would interview everyone involved. I'd try to identify the most defensible position for the company, whether it was that we terminated them or they quit or were suspended. But this is far from ideal. And over a period of years, we kept running into this problem. So how did we address this? The solution, honestly, is pretty simple here. And it really comes down to the fact that manager-generated documentation is essential. And you need to set up a consistent system for your managers to employ that. To understand what the manager intends, they need to communicate to the employee in a documented way, in writing, basically. This means that the manager has to be held accountable to following an HR progressive disciplinary process. And that HR progressive disciplinary process has to be written down for them. Our process was kind of complicated, and for some dealerships, this is going to be too complicated. Others, it's not going to be sophisticated enough. You got to find, working with your attorneys and your HR professionals, a system that works right for you. But our system was along these lines. At the lowest level, we had verbal counseling. This was for very minor things, and it was basically a documented conversation. The manager would talk to the employee about the issue, and then they would compose an email afterwards, just documented the fact that they had a conversation about this issue with the employee, and it was sent to upper management. Above that, we had another level called the informational letter. The informational letter provided written notice to the employee of issues or deficiencies and corrective actions they needed to take. But it didn't contain a threat of termination. It was just putting them on written notice, hey, these are the issues and you need to fix them. A level above that then was the warning letter. The written warning letter was also like the informational letter, a written notice of deficiencies and corrective actions that need to be taken, but it also included a threat of further disciplinary action up to and including termination. And then finally, there was the final warning letter before termination. And this was just like a regular warning letter, but it also said that this is a final warning and that if the issue continues, the next step is termination. This system was designed to be progressive, meaning it escalated in level depending on severity, and it was proportional. So lower level issues could be dealt with verbal counselings or informational letters. We weren't always threatening termination for every little issue that came up, but for serious issues, the progressive disciplinary system escalated to warning letters with threats of termination that we would exercise if the problem wasn't immediately corrected. You need to have a system along these lines that fits your dealership. And when you get it, you need to have it written down and you need to train your managers on it. One of the big keys to eliminating these ambiguous HR actions that we had a tough time interpreting after the fact was to restrict our managers to disciplinary actions contained within the system only. If it wasn't within the progressive disciplinary system, they were not allowed to exercise it. And then from there, enforce it. Everyone needs to follow it. And if you can get this in place, trust me, it will cut down on your HR drama. With that, it's been another episode of Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers. Check out our podcast on all our social media channels. We are at Down Payment Podcast on YouTube, Down Payment Podcast on Instagram, and Down Payment Pod on X.
Thank you for listening. Down Payment, the podcast for used car dealers, is a production of Meta Financial Services Incorporated.